everybody. Welcome to this week's Rough Cut. We have 2 more Rough Cuts this semester after Thanksgiving, so hope you can make those as well. The next one is Molly Cross from Wildlife Conservation Society, and then the last one will be over in the sub with Michael Mann from Penn State, who's a climate scientist. But we're happy to have Elizabeth Rink with us today. I've been really looking forward to getting her to come and give a rough cut. And when I hear her schedule, I realized we're very lucky that we could get her here. She's been on the faculty since 2006 in health and human development, and she got her PhD at Oregon State and her master's in social work at University of Washington. And she's really involved in community-based participatory research, and in particular she looks at the determinants of sexual and reproductive health in indigenous populations. She's working, I know, with Julia on the Fort Peck Reservation with people there, but today she's going to talk about her work in Greenland. So welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. Oh, do I turn the
You're good. Sure, you turned it off.
Oh, okay. All right. So thank you, everyone, for coming. Greenland is near and dear to my heart, as those of you that know me well know that. So I appreciate all of you taking the time to come and listen to what I have to say about my experience in researching Greenland. And today I'm going to talk about a project that I've been working on in Greenland for about 1.5 years. I'm going to do the best I can, because I know this is an ecosystems group of people, to focus on the natural and built environment and how the natural and built environment in Greenland is influencing reproduction in a small settlement in northern Greenland. So just to orient you to the Arctic, for those of you that aren't familiar, Greenland is here. And it was first populated by human beings in around 2,500 BC, and the Inuit have been in Greenland since then. Beginning around the 10th century, Greenland was first discovered by the Vikings in Iceland, and some of you might know the famous story of Eric the Red being banned from Iceland and shunned over to Greenland as part of his punishment for killing somebody. But that was really the first Norse and kind of white Caucasian influence in Greenland over here in the south. So that was in the 10th century. And then since the 12th century, Norway, which is here, and then Denmark, which is down in here, have populated and colonized Greenland. And it's pretty much been the Danish and the Norwegians, but predominantly the Danish, that have colonized and settled in Greenland since the 12th century. In 1985, so from the 12th century to 1985, the Danish were in charge of Greenland and colonized it, and then in 1985, Greenland finally got home rule, technically, although today, if the Danish ever pulled out of Greenland, that whole economy would collapse. So the Danish are still very much involved in Greenland. And then over here on your right, I put up a closer image of the map of Greenland. Nuuk is the capital. Kangerlussuaq is where you fly into. You can only reach Greenland via Denmark, via plane. And Kangerlussuaq is a former U.S. Air Force base from World War II, which has the biggest landing strip in Greenland. So you can't, this is the only way to enter Greenland. And then the Kuusluoqaq, which is the settlement I'm going to be talking about, is up here. But I've worked in all parts of the west coast of Greenland as well as the east coast of Greenland. The population of Greenland is about 50,000 people. The majority of the people live in Nuuk. There's about 12,000 people that live in Nuuk. There are, the only way to get from one place to another is either plane, ship, or sled dog. In the north, you can get around via sled dog because this whole area up in here, the Greenlandic Sea and Baffin Bay and the Denmark Straits, that all freezes from about November to May. So there's no roads connecting any of the towns in Greenland. I apologize for the blurriness of these maps, but I did want to give you a closer look of the area that I'm going to be talking about. This is Kusloswa in the northern part of Greenland. This whole northern part of Greenland is also very famous for the Robert Peary expeditions that happened in the late 1800s and early 1900s, as well as the Knut Rasmussen expeditions, who was a famous Greenlandic and Danish expedition adventurer, and also a lot of Greenland's heritage and their branding of what's important to their culture also really is all about this northern part of Greenland, which has lots of polar bears and whales and you're sled dogging, and there's lots of hunting, and people still wear furs and some of their traditional dress. So there's lots of heritage that's connected to this northern part of Greenland where Kusloswa is. This map on the right is a blow-up of the actual specific region of Kusloswa. Kusloswa is here. It's this island right here off the polar ice cap. This white image here is the polar ice cap, or they refer to it as the inland ice. And why this area is important and why I wanted to show it to you is because this project, or this research project that I'm talking about, is about reproduction and how people reproduce in this one settlement in Kusloswa. And the hunters for centuries have been traveling from down here around Upernavik up to Thule and Karnak and Sabaisivik. And during those hunting expeditions, they would take wives or mate with women in the other settlements, and so therefore have families in different areas around this northern part of Greenland. And this blow up here is just also an example of the different areas where hunters may go to hunt and fish. And even though there has been, we are affected by climate change and the hunters are observing the recession of the ice in this northern part of Greenland and shifts in the animals, which is influencing their hunting patterns, they're still moving through this region and taking wives and partners in these different areas. So some of you may wonder how I started working in Greenland, and I was actually at a conference, so I want to tell this story because I think it's an important story. I was at a conference in Banff in 2007 with a colleague of mine from the University of Toronto, and I gave a talk on Indigenous people and sexual health and community-based participatory research. And in that discussion in the audience were two researchers and physicians from Greenland who heard my talk, and after the talk came up and invited me to come to Greenland and give a very similar talk to them about how I do research with Indigenous people on such a sensitive topic as sexual and reproductive health. So I came back to MSU all excited and went to the chair of my department and said, I've been invited to Greenland, but I need like $5,000. So could you give me $5,000 to travel to Greenland? And so it was Craig Stewart was the chair at the time, and he gave me the money to go to Greenland, and I gave a similar presentation, met lots of people throughout Greenland during that trip, and was invited back to actually start a project. And so, again, I went to the chair and the dean, who was Larry Baker at the time, the dean of our college, and asked for some more money, about $10,000, to start a project in Greenland. And those startup funds led to me getting more money from the Greenlandic government to do my first project, which then led to my second project, which was funded by the National Science Foundation. And then this project that I'll be talking with you about today is also funded by NSF, but it's the third project really in Greenland. But why I think that story is important is because I just think it documents how if you support junior faculty with small amounts of money and they do good work, it can lead to bigger and better things. And this picture here is of the fjord right outside of Kusloswa, frozen during the spring, and it completely freezes over, and you can ski, walk, run, dog sled on the ice there. So Kusloswa, Greenland, which is the settlement that I'm going to talk about is the largest settlement in Greenland. It takes, in good weather, about 4 days of air travel to get there. In bad weather, I've been stranded in Kuusluosuaq for up to 2 weeks waiting to get out. So it's a very remote and isolated place. And you can only get there by helicopter. So you fly on planes for about 3 days, and then your last day is on a helicopter. There are no roads in Kuusluosuaq. There's no indoor plumbing. There is electricity, and the water source, actually, you can see it. There's a little water tower right here. I'm going to have a slide later that shows the water coming down into the settlement that comes into another water house in the settlement, and then you have to get buckets or gallons of water and take it into your tanks in your house. And the water source is actually behind here, behind this little mountain here. This large building here is the school, which is from kindergarten to the 8th grade. And most of the settlement actually is pictured here. These are very traditional Greenlandic homes. And the reason why they're all colored, some of you may wonder this, is that before cell phones and telephones, you used to be able, when you could call people if you needed a doctor or a teacher or a hunter or the postal man, before you could call them on the phone, you could only identify who lived where by the color of their house. So the red houses were for doctors and nurses and healthcare people. The green houses were for the hunters, and so on. So the different colors of the houses, even though that's not practiced today, that's still something they do. Yes?
I come to this as the largest settlement.
Yes.
I was just wondering, what is the difference between like the largest settlement and like Nuuk? Is that a city?
So Nuuk is a city, and if you went to Nuuk, you would feel like you were in a suburb of Copenhagen. Okay, there's 12,000 people that live in Nuuk. There's about 5 miles of road. You can get lattes and ice cream and hamburgers and French fries, and so it's a very, and shop, I mean, it's a very, get massages, it's a very modern place. So that's a city, and cities are usually designated in Greenland because of their infrastructure. They have roads, electricity, they have a main hospital, they'll have banks, they'll have more than one store, and settlements are more what we would consider villages. There's not anywhere near as much infrastructure, like what I was saying about Kuusluosuaq. There's no roads, there's no running water, there is electricity. There's also not, there's a health station there, which is really more, I mean, it's a one-room building where if you need to see a nurse, you can go and see her, but she's going to call the main hospital in Upernavik to talk to the doctor on the phone about what is going on with somebody. So it's really what designates the difference between a city and a settlement in Greenland is about the infrastructure support. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. So in Kuusluosuaq, there's about 450 people. Half of them are under the age of 18, which is one of the reasons why I was invited there to work. In 2010, I was asked by the Minister of Social Affairs to go to Kuusluosuaq and work with people about their reproductive health, because what you're seeing in Kuusluosuaq is young women between the ages of 15 and 20 having babies and also having abortions, and the abortion rate in Greenland is the highest in the world. You will find that about 54% of all women of reproductive age have an abortion, and we're also starting to see in Greenland that the abortion rate is outweighing the birth rate, so we're having a decline in the population in Greenland overall, although in Kuusluosuaq the population is growing. So you have young women having babies, and when you go to Kuusluosuaq, you actually see more children than you do adults. So there is a higher birth rate in Kuusluosuaq than other parts of Greenland, especially with the young women, which was the main reason why I was invited to work there. So some things to know about Kuusluosuaq before I get into some of our preliminary research results is it is a traditional hunting society that is very much still entrenched in these ideas about sharing food resources and subsistence subsistence living. It is not modernized in any way, and it is very much a community that still has a hunter identity. So all the men in Kufoswa very much identify with being a hunter. The women identify with being hunters' wives. And their traditional methods of hunting actually are still practiced, and it's one of the few places in the Arctic that still practices traditional hunting techniques. So you'll see that the hunt narwhal in kayaks. So you have hunters here in kayaks, and this is off the inland ice. They also will fish for halibut and seals in the spring and winter time on the ice, still using traditional methods. All of the hunters still use sled dogs. So in other parts of the Arctic, snowmobiles are more the method of hunting. But in Kufoswa, there's only a few people that have snowmobiles, so the main method is still sled dog. And you can see that this hunter has polar bear pants on, which is definitely the mark of a big hunter. So when men get their first polar bear, that's a big deal. And they will always take the fur of the polar bear and make pants and gloves and boots. And then this picture here, you can see over here, there's seals that have been hunted and they've been skinned because the skins can be sold for money. And the seals, it's seal and narwhal and other kinds of whale meat that are the main source of nutrition for the people in Kufoswa. The other important issue to know about Kufoswa is this idea of a collective consciousness among Greenlanders. And even though throughout Greenland you're going to find this kind of collective identity, it is more powerful in my mind in Kufoswa because of their subsistence living and their need to stick together. So Kufoswa mutes do not like to be alone. You're always around lots of family, and you live with lots of people. Like the average household might have about 10 to 15 people living in one house, and they're all in family with each other. So everything is done together. The hunting is done together. Celebrations are all done in family. The cooking of food is done together with the women in the family. So everything that happens in Kufoswa is all around the family as the nucleus, and keeping that family alive and sustained and going on. And I can't overemphasize that enough, especially when we look at reproduction. And some of the pictures that I have here was a whale hunt that I was fortunate enough to go on this past fall, where the men in Kufoswa, as well as the settlement a little bit farther south, Nuswak, all came together to hunt a minke whale. And it was, again, a collective. It's a good example of the collectiveness of this culture. All the hunters got together and hunted this whale together. They split it up together, and when the whale was completely separated, all the meat was distributed to the hunters and their families in Kufoswa and Nuswak. And this meat here, the skin, is called maktak, which is the primary delicacy of the Greenlanders, is eating this whale skin. And when this whale, by the time they were finished harvesting this whale, there was absolutely nothing left. They even gutted the intestines and took the fish out to eat those, as well as feed their dogs with that. You have some examples of some physical activity here, where sledding is also a big pastime among the young people in Kufoswa. The pot of food up here is polar bear stew, which people also eat a lot of when they're fortunate enough to have a hunter in the family who's harvested a polar bear. They can harvest about 30 polar bear a year up in that Kufoswa region, and again, the polar bears, they don't so much sell the polar bear meat. That's kept for their families. And then down here is a picture that I also think really highlights the collectiveness of this culture is when families come together, especially for celebrations, they will eat all together on the floor in a circle. There'll usually be one pot of stew, which is either seal or whale, and then there'll also be some muktuk. So here you have a picture of muktuk, which is the raw seal skin, or not, the raw whale skin that they will just carve off with knives and eat themselves. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned, you say that you share with the different families with the hunters. Families without hunters, do they get to share?
Everybody has a hunter in their family in Kufoswa. So if you don't have a hunter's family in Kufoswa, you're not surviving. So Kufoswa was settled by 3 main families, and those 3 main families are still very much intact and have started to intermarry. And it was a hunter's settlement. It was settled because the narwhal used to come right into the fjord, and they would hunt them there. So everybody's connected to a hunter's family. And during this process, when they were harvesting the whale, and I have a slide a little bit later on of an older gentleman who used to be a hunter but isn't a hunter anymore. His sons are now hunters. So even though he's not a hunter, his sons are hunters, and he's allowed to come on the hunt, and he will get a share of the meat. And by sharing meat with each other, you tie yourself to each other. So if I'm hunting and I get a narwhal or a polar bear and I come back and I give that to Elizabeth, then Elizabeth and I are then tied together in an emotional way as well as a survival way. Yes?
Are there diets 100% meat-based?
Yes. There is an influx of Western food, which is part of what we're actually going to study in the spring. We're going to study diet, but it's primarily meat-based. They'll eat seal, whale, and if they're fortunate enough to have a hunter who is skilled enough to get a polar bear, because getting polar bears is a very dangerous event, they will eat the polar bear.
Is it all with spears? Or?
Yeah, so in the picture here, you can, I don't know if you can see, but they do have spears in their hands, and I have some other slides of spears. They do use rifles, but you will spear the animal in order to make it your own. So somebody shoots the animal, and then the spearing of it is a collective event, and so all the hunters on the hunt will spear the animal even if the animal is already dead in order to make that animal their own. Okay. So the study, and getting to the research, the actual name of the study is the Population Dynamics in Greenland, a multi-component mixed method study of the dynamics of pregnancy in Greenland with a focus on Kufoswa because of its unique reproductive patterns right now. And what we are examining is the interplay between the cultural, social, economic, and environmental factors that are influencing individuals and communities in Greenland, specifically Kufoswa, to make decisions about having children. And there you have some young people in Kufoswa. So there are 6 research hypotheses, and I'm not going to read every single one of them, but basically what we're looking at are individual characteristics that are influencing reproduction, interpersonal dynamics, so relationship dynamics between heterosexual couples about their sexual and reproductive decision-making. We're looking at issues around contraception and unmet contraception needs, as well as mismatches between contraception and what the women need in Kufoswa, the cultural kinship factors that are influencing reproduction, and I'll get to that in a moment, and then also the changes in the natural and built environment and how that is influencing reproduction as well. And here's a picture of some drying halibut, and fish is not considered a yummy food in Greenland. It's like a poor man's food, and you can dry fish for your hunting expeditions, but mostly fish is the fish are harvested in order to sell them to make money. So it's one of the few ways that hunters in Kufloswa can make money is by selling their fish. So when I go there, I'm just in heaven because there's halibut and there's salmon and there's trout. And when they ask me what I want to eat, I'll say I want salmon, and they'll be like, but that's not really very good food, Beth. Why don't we cook you some whale? And I'm like, oh, okay, which is also good to eat. This is a community-based participatory research project, which for those of you that aren't familiar with CBPR is a framework for doing research where you work really closely with a community group in your community to help navigate the research, design the research projects, help you interpret the results, disseminate the results. And so most researchers that use CBPR, really the advisory board is a co-researcher with you. And you really follow their words of wisdom and not your academic necessarily words of wisdom, but you really follow their lead in how you go about conducting the research, as well as analyzing the results and what those results mean. And so here is a picture of 3 of the members of our community board and a mayor, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So this is Hans Danielson. He's about 65 years old. He's one of the elders in the community. And he's from one of the main families in Kufloswa. You have Utilia Jensen. She is one of the only female hunters. I think she is the only female hunter that I know of in Kufloswa, where she is actually allowed by the male hunters to go out and hunt with a rifle and a harpoon, and this is her on the whale hunt. And then you have, and she's from one of the other main families in Kufloswa. Here you have Johat Nielsen, who is dressed up for Halloween, and I don't have another picture of him, which is why I had to use this one. But actually, Halloween is not a traditional Greenlandic holiday, but it is very, but Greenlanders love it and embrace it because it's very similar to another holiday that they have there around Christmas time, which is a tradition of dressing up in scary clothes and going to people's houses and going through this ritual where you scare people and then make them their friends. And that tradition all has a heritage in Greenland from the long history of the Vikings and the hunters, the whale hunters coming through Greenland and outsiders coming into these small settlements, and the Inuit needing to figure out a way in their psyche to integrate these outsiders into their collective. So they created this ritual where they go through this process of being afraid and scaring other people and then making friends with them. So that is why Halloween, even though it's a totally different holiday, why Greenlanders like it so much. So these 3 individuals are on our advisory board, and then Timotheus Peterson is the mayor of Kufloswa, and even though he is not involved on our advisory board, we still need his approval to work in Kufloswa and his buy-in, and he was one of the main people that I worked with in the very beginning to help set this project up. So the methods that we're using for our research in Kufloswa is we're very much based in Indigenous research methodologies. The more I work with Indigenous communities, the more I realize that everything I learned about classic Western health behavior theories and models just totally doesn't work. So this project, I'm using no classic health behavior models. We're using very much a very open-ended, fluid research design in which we ask very general open-ended questions, and we let the people in Kufloswa just tell basically whatever comes up for them. We can ask them questions about what do they think about the quota system, and they might start talking about something that happened in their childhood. So it's just very open-ended. Some of our other methods are ethnography, so that's more of an anthropological method, the ethnography and the phenomenological inquiry, where the research team spends lots of time in the community, integrating with the community, taking notes, maybe having informal conversations about their observations about the community. We are also doing in-depth interviews, and then towards the end of the study, we'll be doing focus groups. And at this point, the study in Kushloswa started in 2013, but the capacity building started in 2013. I did my first data collection in 2014, and at this point, we've conducted 60 interviews with an equal amount of males and females from the ages of 15 to 65 or so. So the emerging themes that we're seeing around influencing individual and community reproduction in Kushloswa, and again, the study isn't done, so this is just some general ideas that the research team and the advisory board are having around what we think is influencing the birth rate and the abortion rate and the growing population in Kushloswa. And here's a picture of a polar bear right in the fjord off the coast of Kushloswa. So the first fairly obvious one is just a lifestyle in transition. The hunters are very much restricted now by the quota systems that were implemented in the 90s. And the restrictions in the quota system in combination with the changes in the climate and the change in the patterns of the migration of the animals is very much restricting what they can do and how many animals they can harvest, where they can harvest them, and then their ability to actually feed their family. So what you're seeing is, even though for centuries the men have been moving up and down the coast of northern Greenland, they're needing to go even farther now and stay for longer periods of time or go during different times of year in order to get the meat and the animals that they need in order to support their families. And because Kushloswa is so much entrenched in a hunter's identity, the men and their families there, they don't know anything else. They're not able to embrace another way of thinking about how they want their life to be. And when we do speak with the hunters during the interviews, they will say, I just want the quota system to be lifted. The biologists are lying. They're just trying to control us. They're very much in denial about the shifts that the changes in the environment are having over the long course of their economic livelihood. And Mark Nuttall, who is a Canadian researcher, actually has done a lot of research on the hunting patterns in this northern area of Greenland, and he has lots to say about how the hunters are, how they need to integrate and change their ways and address the economic challenges that people in Kushloswa are facing. And I do have some more pictures here of the whale hunt. You can see all the hunters here harvesting the whale. This is Kushloswa, the island in the background, which is demarcated by this thumb. They call it the devil's thumb. That's what Kushloswa means in Greenlandic, is devil's thumb. And here is a photograph, actually, of all the hunters harvesting the whale. The whale is still alive. You can see the air spout coming out here, but you can see the harpoons with all the hunters having their turn with connecting to that whale. And then here is a man seal hunting during the spring. So this transition in their economic livelihood is impacting their ability to take care of their families. And so sometimes what you'll start to find is that the men have to go live in a whole other community in order to make enough money to support their families. So in those instances, they're away from their wives or their girlfriends. They've had children with their wives or their girlfriend in Kushloswa, but now they're in a new settlement or a new city, and they will take another girlfriend or partner and have children with them. Or, this is not gender exclusive, you will see women who will leave in order to get an education, which is rare, but women will leave to get an education, and they may partner with a man in another city or settlement even though they might have a child with a hunter in Kusloswa. So you see very dynamic family arrangements happening in Kusloswa. We definitely see an inadequate and overburdened infrastructure in Kusloswa. Like I've already said, there's no hospital in Kusloswa, and the health station is, they just got a nurse there this September. So this is the first time they've had an actual nurse to work in Kusloswa. You're not able to get contraception in Kusloswa as a young woman. You have to go to Upernavik if you want birth control pills or Depo-Provera shots or an IDU. They do distribute condoms, but my previous research in Greenland, my second study in Greenland, was all about STIs and condom use, and it's just a ridiculous, it's not working at all. Like, people do not use condoms. So even though they're available, they're not used. So there's a lack of a good healthcare system in Kusloswa. Also, if women need an abortion, or when they do deliver, they have to leave. So they're leaving their family, and they're going to either Upernavik, Ilulissat, or Nuuk, depending on the severity of the issues with the pregnancy, in order to have a baby, and they're doing that alone. So in a society where everything is based on being together and being a family, especially if you have a 15-year-old girl leaving all of that to go have a child in another city where she doesn't know anybody, that is a very frightening experience and very overwhelming for these young people that do not have a skill set to survive in a modern culture. They only have a school that goes up to 8th grade in Kusloswa, so if you want education past 8th grade, you have to leave. So again, you're leaving your family, and if you leave your family, that is synonymous with, you know, dying or leaving a core part of yourself behind. So you will find that if young people leave Kusloswa in order to get an education, they are not successful, and they're coming back, and then you have lots of young people in Kusloswa with idle time, and when there's idle time, they can start to engage in high-risk behaviors, one of them being unprotected sex, and so that we're also seeing is what's contributing to the reproduction. So here is the water source. So the water source comes down from the mountains through these pipes into a water house, and then people go get their water. This is a typical Greenlandic house, and as I said, there's anywhere from 15 to 20 people living in that small house with no running water. This is a picture of the town. This is the fish factory, which is not able to hold all of the fish that the hunters get. So once the fish factory is full, the hunters have lost their ability to make money on their economy. And then I did want to show you this picture, although my talk isn't at all about environmental health. There are significant environmental health issues in Kusloswa, one of them being all the wasted blubber. So this photograph is of a pile of seal and whale blubber, and every house has large mounds of this blubber outside of their house, which when it's frozen most of the year, it's no big deal because it's frozen, it's hard, it doesn't smell. But from about June to October, this is soft, mushy, and smelly, and covered with flies, and highly infectious. So you do, and that's just one of the many environmental health issues. They also burn all of their waste, so all of their plastics, their human waste, their feces, their urine, all of that gets burned. And every house has this mound. So it is from about June or end of May to October, beginning of October, when it's warm, and we're talking like 40, 50 degrees warm, these issues are highly palpable. You can really feel the unhealthiness there. The culture of kinship is also influencing the reproduction. They still practice their traditional practice of adoption, which means that if a woman has a child, the family, and depending on who is the main leaders in the family, can make a decision about what happens with that child. So a child can be given away to another family member if a couple doesn't have a child. So if a couple doesn't have a child and another woman in the family gets pregnant, there can be a decision to give that child to the childless family member. And there also, when somebody dies, the spirit of the person that has died can also be seen to inhabit the spirit of the child of a pregnant woman. And so when that woman has a baby, the baby isn't necessarily hers. It can be the former spirit of the person that just died, and so therefore that child is tied to that family. So in that kind of kinship network, you again see this collective consciousness. And so their reproduction is very much based on keeping the family going and keeping these kinship networks going that connect everybody to each other, because again, it's safe to be connected to each other. You're living in a very harsh Arctic environment where over time, it's not necessarily as much related to their survival anymore, but like you always did everything together, because if you were alone out on the ice or hunting, you would not survive. So this collectiveness is even being seen in their kinship networks. But what we are starting to see is with younger couples who are pregnant, they might not want to give their baby away for adoption to another family member, but it's not their choice necessarily, and so they're not really aware of their rights. So you can have a grandmother, a grandfather, an aunt, an uncle take the baby away to raise it themselves, and that young couple is basically powerless within that family to do anything about it because they don't understand what their rights are as parents. So you are starting to see these new constraints around with younger couples wanting to be responsible for raising their own children, but not knowing how to go about doing it. Kathy, are you okay? You're making a face.
No, I'm just listening.
Okay, all right. And I would also say that the decision to terminate a pregnancy with an abortion is also a collective decision within the family as well. And there are instances where young women will want to terminate a pregnancy, but the family will say, no, have the child, I'll help you raise the child, you need to have this child. And because it's, again, you're talking about 450 people, it's a very isolated community, and there's a lot of what I'm seeing is social control and norming behavior around their child rearing. And this is a celebration of the first day that the sun comes up in February after being dark for since about November. The sun appears on one specific day in February, and the people in Kuusluosuaq have a very large celebration. And then Otto is the hunter over here. He's one of the oldest hunters and most successful hunters in Kuusluosuaq. The other area that is influencing reproduction is their mating behavior patterns, and what we're seeing are very fluid and open sexual relationships that are characterized by very volatile emotions. So you'll have couples that will be totally in love one moment, and then the next moment they'll be fighting and arguing with each other. And so their relationship emotions and dynamics are very up and down over time. But because it is a collective society, there is an impetus to want to get along and to live in harmony with each other. So even though there is conflict, that conflict will move quickly into forgiveness and acceptance and learning how to get along. So you will have couples where maybe the male or the female has had has had an affair. We call it an affair. They call it a relationship, or they just had sex. It's not even a relationship. It's just sex with somebody else, and they will immediately, they might be angry with the person, but they also will forgive them, and there will still be a need to keep the family together. And this is true, again, with both males and females. It's not selective to any one gender. But this is very much consistent with the studies that I've done in Greenland before, where sex is seen as very natural. It's like drinking water and sleeping is what research participants will say to me. It's not seen as a relationship. You have sex with people and then you have your family. And so it's about the family. And even though Greenland has been Christianized, and that's not necessarily a Christian belief, you still see this traditional practice. And again, this is a normative practice. When we've talked to the elders in the community about the open relationships, they have said, well, it's always been this way. We've always done this. I need to probably speed it up a little bit because I've over-talked as I usually do, but the other issue that we're starting to see, I think because of the transitions in the economy and the hunting society and the poor infrastructure and lack of support for meeting their their economic and social needs, we are starting to, and as well, in combination with these volatile relationships, we are starting to see increases in psychological problems with people in Kusloswa. So people will often in our interviews, I mean, every single one of the 60 interviews we've done so far has talked about being depressed, having anxiety, stress, feeling hopeless. There were a rash of suicides in Kusloswa from about 2005 to when we got there for the first time in 2013, where every year there was one person that had committed suicide in this small settlement. And because everybody is related, the suicide has a huge ramification throughout the settlement. But you also will see people very resilient, very connected to Kusloswa, very much wanting to stay there and very proud of their community and proud of their lifestyle and able, because of this capacity to forgive and have compassion for each other and to stick together, this resiliency is also helping to keep people going. And here you have pictures of one of the younger Tupiak, one of the younger hunters in Kusloswa, and then some of the younger men at the clubhouse. There is a clubhouse there on the weekends for young people to get together. The other important thing about Kusloswa is that it's the only dry settlement in Greenland, so there's no alcohol there at all. They make their own moonshine, but it's not prevalent. The alcohol use is not prevalent. And you can't get any liquor there at all, and you can't even bring it in. Like I can't even smuggle in a box of red wine if I wanted to because you get searched, and people will all know that you have alcohol. And there are 2 police officers in Kusloswa that will come and find you if you do have alcohol. I mean, that has not happened to me. That has happened to other outsiders because I already knew that. The other final theme that's directly related to the interviews is this idea of integration of landscape, memoryscape, and family. So we see that even though there are no jobs in Kusloswa and no other than being a hunter or working in the school, which there's not a lot of job opportunities, people do not want to leave there. And they do not want to leave because their family, their immediate family, their extended family, their family history is all connected to this place. And all of the memories that they have in their consciousness are connected to this place. So researchers that do research on social geography and emotional geographies, this is very much related to what we're seeing in Kusloswa, is that your family is there, they want to stay there, they do not want to leave, even if they might be have more economic opportunities somewhere else. And so the impetus there is to keep reproducing in order to keep the family going and keep the community going. And this is a picture from on top of one of the mountains in Kusloswa looking out at the fjord, and then this is a picture on the fjord when the ice is frozen looking up towards some of the houses in the settlement. The very last issue around the research, which isn't related to any of our research questions, is what we are finding with the research team is that because of the traumas and the changes, the traumatic life experiences people have been having, as well as all the changes and shifts they're seeing in their environment. They are very much wanting to talk about their feelings, and so coming as an outsider, we are starting to find that the research process is actually a therapeutic process for the Kuslo-Swamutes, because they will come and talk to us for hours, and some of our interviews last up to 3 hours, and sometimes people want to come back. And this is also something that we see in research with indigenous populations who have experienced trauma or traumatic histories, is the narrative of telling their story is a therapeutic intervention. And we are definitely seeing that in Kuslo-Swa. And this is a picture of the older hunter that I was talking about earlier, who is not a hunter any longer, but his sons are hunters, and so he can go on the hunt, and he's eating muktak there. This is a picture of Arctic berries, which are only available in August if the weather is good, and it is the only fresh roughage that Northern Greenlanders have access to. And then here's a group of children out in an open boat who actually were out trying to pick berries, but ended up on the whale hunt that we all ended up on. So some of the summary statements, I think I've touched on all of these issues. The changes in the environment are influencing people's ability to take, or hunters' abilities to take care of themselves. The infrastructure does not support prevention or any, the infrastructure, or like people going off to get education because people want to stay in Kuslo-Swa. So it's very much a broken infrastructure, what we're seeing in Kuslo-Swa. We're seeing psychological discord related to depression, stress, anxiety. The fluid relationships are leading to conflict as well as forgiveness. The kinship networks are still very much intact. They're traditional kinship networks, which you don't necessarily see in Nuuk, Sisimiut, or Ilulissat, the other bigger cities. And that's influencing the childbearing and who raises children. We're seeing traditional patterns of coupling, so that has not necessarily changed over time, although I think the span of influence has changed, so men and women are going a little bit farther away than they used to historically, and staying maybe a little bit longer away from their primary partners, and that can relate in coupling. You see a fierce survival instinct, which is motivating this need to stay in Kuslo-Swa and propagate and have children to keep the community and the family going. And then you have a very strong connection to place that is really bound together by these shared life experiences as families and communities. So the future directions for the project are, we're going back in the spring and we're going to ask some more questions about contraception, pregnancy, diet, and exercise. We'll then be doing focus groups in Kuslo-Swa and in other communities in Greenland with policy makers to help figure out what recommendations to make to Kuslo-Swa to help create healthy reproduction there. And then the study will end in spring of 2017. I wanted to thank all sorts of people, some of you that are here today. So Anna Kurtula, she's the project officer with NSF who funds my research in Greenland. Gita Trondheim and Christo are the research partners in Greenland at Ilulissat, the University of Greenland. Brigitte Kalman, who is responsible for several of the pictures that you saw here today, is a German woman that lives in Kuslo-Swa and has married a Greenlandic man. Elizabeth Bird for all of her great work for keeping things going here while I'm gone. I've got, and I was saying this to Kathy before I talked, I've gotten an incredible amount of support from MSU administration for my work. I am gone almost 3 months out of the year. It used to be almost 6 months out of the year, but I've reduced it to 3 now. And that takes a lot of support from MSU administration to readjust my teaching and my workload. And so I'm very appreciative of that, as well as the HHD faculty who have to kind of carry the burden when I'm gone, especially around my teaching. I also do research with the Fort Peck tribe, so they're always wondering, Beth, why are you leaving us again to go to Greenland? So they're also very supportive of my research. And then Kristen Burrell, who owns the yoga studio where I teach yoga. She also is just as flexible with my schedule, and then my partner Kirby is great, especially when I'm gone with the long phone calls. So thank you. So Koyanak, which means thank you in Greenlandic.
Time for some questions. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Could you speak to the role of the central government family payments in maintaining the livelihoods
Yeah.
of people in the community?
Yeah. So Greenland up until 2008 was divided into 18 municipalities. So there were 18 basically states in Greenland up until 2008. In 2008, they shifted the 18 municipalities to 4. So this whole northern part of Greenland is one state, and it is also part of why the infrastructure is so broken and having a difficult time meeting the needs of Kusleswamutes, because they went from a decentralized government to a centralized government. And so even though there is a mayor in Kusleswa, he does not have the same decision-making power as he used to because of the centralized governments in these different areas in Greenland. So in Greenland, you can get it's similar to our public assistance here in the U.S. You can get public assistance if you have children, but it goes to where the child is living. So if a grandparent, for example, is raising their grandchild, the money for that child goes to the grandparent and not to the parents. And so what we are starting to see in Kusleswa, because of the economic hardship, is children are a commodity. Like if you're raising that child, you're getting money. So grandparents, especially if the husband has died and they're not able to hunt anymore or get money or get support through their hunting, they can get money through raising children. So that is definitely one of the issues that we're starting to see in Kusleswa, that some of the younger couples have talked about, that their grandparents will take their child to raise them in order to get the funding. That answer the question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes?
Double check, they speak English or?
In Kusleswa, no. So when I go to Kusleswa, I go with an interpreter, and I probably know, after almost 10 years of working in Greenland, I probably know like 20 words of Greenlandic. It's a very complicated language. In Kusleswa, I'd say there's probably 3 or 4 people that speak English, and they're either Birgitta, who's German, or Danish. There are a few Danish teachers that know English, but everybody speaks Greenlandic in Kusleswa. In the other cities, Nuuk, Sisimiut, Ilulissat, you can speak English and people will understand you. But English is the third language. Greenlandic is the first language, Danish is the second language, and English is the third language. Yes?
So this place that I'm working in Mongolia, like very common problems, you mentioned that. So there are about 1,000 people in that community that I'm working, and they are quite faith-based, and they want to be there. At the same time, they have lots of tourists going there because they're really religious.
Mm-hmm.
It's like easily accessible in like some ways because it's from the southern end of the Siberia and not the Mongolia. So because of all those outsiders, they're getting like an idea of like, oh, our life is bad, because people who are coming have like better lives, and some younger generation is like, oh, I want to leave this place, I just want to go out of here. So how about that kind of experience?
No. No, young people want to stay in Kusleswa and be there. And their tourists that come to Kusleswa are very few and far between. And if they do come, they're kept in just one main area. They don't tend to wander around Kusleswa at all. And they don't really interact with the population. They might go ashore to go to the shop, but that's but that's about it. So you don't see the same level of impact from tourism in Kufoswa that you do in other parts of Greenland, or even, you know, in other parts of the Arctic, for sure. So young people want to stay there.
Do they have access to the internet and media?
They love Facebook, so they Facebook a lot with each other. They all have cell phones, but cell phones are shared within a family, and you can run out of minutes. Tusas is what they call it, and if they only get minutes when they get money, so your cell phone might not work for a while. The only public internet that the public can use is in the school, and you can use it at night during certain hours, and it's really, really slow, and a lot of things are blocked. So you have a lot of restrictions on social media, but you also have Facebook, which when they are able to access it, they love. And you do see, you know, the goth 16-year-olds walking around Kufoswa, or, you know, they're young people. I mean, young people are like that in a lot of other countries, but they don't want to leave. I mean, you see them trying to be hipsters, but that doesn't mean they want to leave. They're just, you know, adolescence is adolescence. Yes?
The environmental effects that you mentioned, unless I missed it, sounded like they were fairly indirect in terms of being governmental decisions on quotas on hunts. Are you considering direct effects of environmental, like ice dynamics, things like that that might have effects?
I'm not, because it's not my area, but I'm sure that there are people that will work with the hunters in Kufoswa, not in Kufoswa, but up in this Bampton Bay, Melville Bay area, on the ice dynamics and how that's influencing where they hunt and what they do. So no, I'm not investigating the quotas. I just know that they talk a lot about the restrictions in the quota system and how that's hindering their abilities to take care of their families.
But they haven't noticed any changes. They're worried about their hunting style or anything like that yet.
They're still tenaciously holding on to how they hunt. The one thing that they did mention is that before the quota systems, the hunting used to be much more harmonious and done again as a collective. But now with the quota systems, men might go out in groups, but those groups are against each other, so there's more aggressive, violent behavior during the whale hunts and some of the polar bear hunts than what they've noticed before the quotas. And yeah, so that they will comment on, and that is related to their hunting style.
Thank you. This has been great.
Thanks.
Really, really interesting.
Thanks. Thank you.